We're going to be jumping right into this video today. As you can see from the last video, I have worked ahead a little bit. I started mapping things out in the background, kind of where I want them, kind of what I want them to look like. So I'm going to go over that real quick before we move on. So if you haven't gone and watched the other videos so far, you need to go back and watch the 3 videos before you watch this one to see how we got to where we're at right now. In the last video we left off with the highway, the road, and I didn't quite nearly finish it in that video. I got it to where it was pretty much blocked into where I needed to go for the time being. So I have went ahead off camera, finished it pretty much. I haven't decided if I'm going to leave it the flat gray or if I'm going to make it actually a solid black, not like a solid black, but a black asphalt road. I decided to stop where I was because I liked the way it looked and actually continue on with the background. And then once I peel the road up, when we get the background done, the whole thing will just pretty much tell me what I want to do with it. But it did look good. I was really thrilled with how it came out, even though you guys can't see it because it's taped up. But I have a feeling that having a darker black against all these colors is just going to give it more of that that photo look that I'm trying to capture. I'm not trying to make this like a photorealistic as far as like realism goes, or like hyper realistic. I want it to look more like a painting. Sorry, I couldn't get that word out. A painting. I want it to make it look like a painting, but more on like the airbrush side of it. I don't want it to make it look so real that it looks like a sticker or like a vinyl or anything like that. I want it to actually look the way I want it to look, like a painting, but done with the airbrush. So if that makes sense, we're moving along pretty well. I'm going to go over what I did after I did the highway. I masked the highway up in the background and in the foreground. And then what I did was I mapped out my horizon line. The middle line is a horizon line because that's what's going to pretty much make everything level. So I kind of added a little bit of hilly areas in it and just kind of faded them out. I haven't decided how far out I want to go. Like right now, it's pretty well even from side to side. I'm thinking about bringing the left side out a little bit more by adding another small like mountain or hill over here, but I haven't decided that quite yet. So I did that, and then I just started building that up from there. We already, in the last video, you already saw me chalk everything out the way I kind of wanted everything. So this is just pretty much a copycat from that of the chalk drawing. So I just kind of followed the lines and kind of just created my own hills and my own mountains. So then I just moved right up, and these are going to be grassy hills up here too. I'm not really sure if I like it the way it is or if I'm going to change it as I go along. And that's one thing you guys understand, like when you're doing this stuff and you're creating something from nothing. Like I have no images to go off of. Yes, I can look up images of mountains. I can look up images of like grassy hillsides, things like that to kind of get an idea. But this image right here does not exist anywhere. So this is a one-off painting that I'm pulling off here and doing for this customer. So, and that's the one thing I love doing, is doing something that nobody else will ever have ever again. And then, you know, the customers are always thrilled about that because it's not something that I'm going to duplicate over and over and over again. So we were creating a one-off image here. So with that being said, there are things that I might change as I go along. Nothing is set in stone is what I'm trying to get at. So you got to understand that as we go along, if things start to change, if I start seeing something that it's not really fitting well, I can always change it. That's one thing about airbrushing. You're not really putting a lot of paint down. So there is room to where you can actually maneuver or shift things around or just make it look a little bit different. Like even what's in here right now, I honestly had it looking way different than what it is right now. Right here, I've actually built it up a little bit more through doing whites and light grays. And then the mountains were the same way. The mountains didn't start off looking like this. Like, I built them up to make them look like this, and I changed about 2 or 3 different times to make them look a certain way that I want them to look. Same way with like the snow falling off of it and things like that, and all the shadowing and shading that's in this. And then the sky, you know, I'm gonna throw some clouds up there. I pretty much prematurely threw some clouds up there a little bit to see what it would like kind of look like. But it is gonna be a sunset with a little bit of clouds up there. So I went ahead and threw that on there. The only thing we gotta do now is convert all this to color, but also bring it out to where it's gonna actually all form one whole entire image. So that's what we're doing today. I'm gonna start off with the grass areas, and we're gonna work our way pretty much up. Now, with the grass, it's gonna take a really long time because, especially in the foreground, I want almost, especially like really close to the semi, I want you to be able to like count the blades of grass in this picture. And then as obviously it goes back to the background, that starts to I can't even say that word. It's gonna start to disappear, is what, you know, dissipate is what I'm trying to say. So we'll eventually fade that out towards the backside, and the back of the hills are gonna be just completely to where you can't really count the blades of grass, but it's still gonna be readable to where it's actually grass. So, and then we're gonna eventually work that color into the sky, because when I do the grass, first I wanna say the reason why I did all this in white is because we're working on a darker background color. So all the colors that I'm gonna be putting in this are gonna be bright colors. So I need to have that white there to kind of pick up those colors and make those colors readable and actually not so transparent. Because if I would put the colors on this gray, it's gonna take a lot longer for them to cover as if I put them on against the white. The white's gonna accept the colors a lot better than this gray will, is what I'm saying. So the first thing I'm gonna do is, you might think that I might just grab a custom green or one-off green and just start doing the grass and things like that, but no, I am gonna start off with a yellow. Don't really know what yellow this is, to be honest with you. I've had this for a very long time, so I just use it when I need it. Don't really do too much yellow, so I've got a lot here, but it's gonna really help me with creating the way I want the grass and the hills and everything to look like, and the sky. We're gonna use the same yellow in the sky, so we're gonna transfer this over from the grass to the sky. And the reason why I'm using yellow first in the grass is if you know, if you ever look at a piece of grass, it's not just green. There's a little bit of tint to it. They're all different shades of greens to grass, depending where you live. But the yellow is gonna make that more, the shades of it is gonna read a lot better as whether you're gonna be looking at it as grass or not. So the yellow is gonna help cover with that, but it's also gonna help shading all that blades of grass in there and giving it something a little bit more than just one color. And there's gonna be different shades of green and things like that, but it's gonna help just cover the grass initially. So I've got the yellow mixed up and my airbrush, and we're gonna set you guys up and we're gonna start knocking out these blades of grass. It's gonna take a little bit of time, especially in the forefront, but you might see me jump around from the grass to the sky, just to kind of keep me going and doing two things at once. So that's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna set you guys up on a time lapse, and I'm gonna get to I want to give you guys a still video of this so you can capture the grass so far, and it is coming out awesome. Just like feathers, just like hair, grass is very, very tedious. It takes a long time because you're literally putting every strand and every piece of grass pretty much in the photo. So it just takes time. And if you know anything about airbrushing, you saw that I started off with what we call dagger strokes up front, because like I said, I want to be able to people to actually look at this and kind of count the blades of grass in this image. And as it gets further, it kind of just dissipates into, like, the best way I can explain it is like little dots that are grouped together with a little bit of strands here and there, but for the most part it's a bunch of little dots grouped together. And how it's coming out to be what it is right now is it all has to have that ground layer. Like if you saw the image before I started putting the yellow on, you saw the white and the grays have a shadow to it, right? It had a highlight, it had a shadow, it had everything that I needed for the yellow to come through in certain areas. So yellow is at its brightest on top of white. White will bring out any really neon color. So if you're doing any type of neon color, white base is what you really need to bring some of these colors out. So you can already see, I already started doing it. Up here where it had more white, up here, you can kind of see that yellow it's a little bit brighter than some of this other stuff. Now, I did over reduce my paint. I usually don't tell you guys what airbrush I'm using, but I will in this, that way you guys can understand how far I'm reducing my paint. And I'm using my Eclipse. This is hands down the best airbrush all around. I've got my Micron next to me as well for the smaller stuff if I ever need to grab it. But this, you can pull off really fine detail with an Eclipse. This is the CS model. It's literally the cheapest, the best airbrush you can buy. And it doesn't have a really small needle in it. I think it's like a 0.35 if I'm not mistaken. So you can really pull off a lot of things. And I'm just telling you that because it's a bigger needle. I don't have to reduce my paint so much like I would in my Micron. The Micron is a 0.15 needle that's in it. So it's a really tiny needle compared to the Eclipse needle. So I have to reduce my paint differently when I'm using either one of those airbrushes. And I've got multiples of each if I ever need to have them all at once. But with using the Eclipse, I'm able to put a little bit more paint down because it's not as over reduced. It's a little bit over reduced, but it's not as much as if I use my Micron. So you can just tell, like in the darker shaded areas, you can just tell like it's just a little bit of a darker yellow. Now obviously I can go over certain areas and really brighten them up, and I will eventually, but for now I'm just blocking it in. And we're gonna start moving on to the left side and start knocking this grass out. So I'm gonna do the exact same thing what I did over here and do it on the left side. And then I'll bring you guys back in so you can see everything before we start adding the other color to it. Finished up the yellow for the grass. It's a lot of detail in this thing. Now, before we switch over to actually do different colors of shaded green in the grass, I still have the yellow on my airbrush. So we're gonna do the sky. We're gonna fog in the sky because it's gonna have some yellows, oranges, possibly a little bit of red. It's gonna be a sunset, so sunset colors is what we're going with here. But I want to show you guys all the grass, the way it's shaping out. Now, you can tell that this photo, or that the grass in this photo has a lot of depth to it. And I want to kind of explain that. and how I went about doing that with one color. So you can kind of see, like up here, it's got its own, like, it's made its own shadows. What I did with it, I made everything to where I imagined it in my head. If we're gonna have a sunset here in the middle, you know, it's gonna be shining light through this valley right here, right above this semi. It's gonna shine all the light through here. So all these hills, when they they're hilly parts, the very tops are going to hit the most of that sun when it's coming down in that sunset. So those areas are what I made really, really bright. It's actually not really too bright. I only went over it a couple times, so I can brighten this up a lot more if I really, really wanted to. And I might at the very end to see how it all comes together. But I worked that in. And once you start working that in like that, you start imagining how the sun actually reflects off of surfaces and things like that. You can actually create your own shadows and highlights as you're creating it. It's kind of hard to explain, but you have to imagine that you know how light sources reflect off of surfaces. And that's the best way I can really explain it. Now, I live out in the country. I don't really have, you know, Indiana's pretty flat, but you can go through, if you live in a state that has a bunch of hills and stuff like that, go through and zap some pictures, you know, when the sun's coming down and when the sun's out, and you can see like everything, how it's highlighted and shadowed, like especially in this valley. Like even though this is the same ground, I don't know how to explain that, but it's like the same ground essentially, right? This is just in the forefront, that's just in the background. So imagine these hills are gonna have a little bit of a shadow against these bigger hills in the background, right? So I didn't put as much color in those areas, which allowed me to make a shadow by itself without adding any darker colors to this. So essentially I just added more paint to the areas that had the highlights, and I kind of stayed away from the areas that didn't have any, hardly any paint. That way the shadows were actually created within the same realm, within the same shade of the same color. And that's another thing, when you go to reduce your paints, it allows you to build things up. Like if you didn't reduce your paints, one, it's probably not going to flow through your airbrush really well, but two, it's going to give it that one color as strong as it is the first time around. So when you're reducing your paints, you're killing that tone and that color is what you're essentially doing, because you're thinning it out, right? So when you're doing that, you're able to go back over and over and over and create layers on top of layers and start adding more paint. And what happens is that tone, that pigment and that color, that tone, it gets brighter because you're essentially adding more paint to that area, right? So that's exactly what I did here. I was using the reduce paint to my advantage, hitting the areas that I knew in my head of where I wanted the light sources to be, and I stayed away from the areas that are going to create their own shadow within the picture. So that's the best way I can explain it. Hopefully that makes sense to you guys. But yeah, we're going to move on to the sky, and I'm going to try to do this without doing a time lapse, that way you guys can see. It's not going to be anything crazy, but I do want to have that layer down of yellow, because essentially when you're looking at a sunset, the background color is pretty much yellow, right? It's usually yellows, oranges, but the furthest color back is usually like a lighter color. So that's what I'm going to use this for. And as it's worked its way forward, you're going to have some of those oranges and everything else, like the reds and the oranges, different shades of oranges, different shades of yellows coming through. And then the brightest yellow is going to be at the forefront of the sunset. So I'm just going to start. Hopefully that's good for you guys right there. Trying to make this video not as long as the last few videos have been. So I need to cover that up real quick, that edge of that semi, that tape creep back. So I created clouds here, right? So I'm not really gonna be worried too much about the clouds. Actually, I'm not gonna worry about all, because I just kind of winged it on those, and they weren't something that was gonna be exactly where I wanted it to be, or where they were going to be. So let me just cover this up. Sometimes you'll have that. I mean, this tape has been on here for how many days now, right? Oops. And that's one thing why you don't pull your tape, you're supposed to cut it. I got a bad habit of pulling the tape to break it off. This is a really tight radius, so we might not be able to get it to stay very long. Oops. I had it, but it just did not. Okay, that's probably as good as I'm gonna get it. I'm gonna lock it down with a piece of tape over it. That way it don't come back up, or try to make it not come back up. This will kind of tape over this fine line like this, will kind of hold it in place for a little bit. So there you go. And like I said, I'm not worried about the clouds. I'm really not worried about the mountains, because those will be probably the last thing that I fill in as far as getting all the detail and everything in there. So I am going to just, I'm not going to really hit everything really hard. It's just going to be a layer of a little bit of detail, like very minimal, to show where I want the light to come through at. So I'm not worried about really the mountains. We can always go back over that. It's not a big deal, but we don't want to wash it away, right? We want to keep it there, but yellow is pretty transparent anyways, so it's going to allow me to build this up a lot because of how transparent it is. And I'm just doing this by creating one-way strokes going back and forth. Because I really don't want to just sit here and blast one solid color, like just hold my trigger down and blast it, because then you're going to create overspray everywhere and it's going to look like a blob of yellow, to be honest. So you want to give it kind of like a stylized look when you're doing this, almost like you're painting sun rays, right? Just sideways. But you're going to create that layer of depth as you're building this stuff up. And I'm not looking at a picture. I looked at a few pictures before for references, but I don't have anything really pulled up. I just know in my head kind of what I want it to look like. And this is just one of the first colors of many that we'll put in this. See how much paint I'm putting on? It's not even, it's really not even affecting those clouds. It's not even covering them up. Which is fine. I'm not worried about it. At one point we'll go back in and we'll put the clouds back in it. But right now we're just creating those colors is all we're doing. We're creating that layer for everything else to sit on top of with a little bit of style to it. Now I want, kind of like in this smaller area right here, I want it to be the brightest. So I'm probably gonna hit this a lot more than I will other areas. We can honestly almost make it look the brightest up here, like the sunset is actually happening behind one of these mountains over here. And it's just like kind of wrapping itself around the mountain, which would be pretty cool. And it's just a bunch of layers going back and forth. Maybe we got another bright spot happening over here. All right. I'm kind of liking how that is, the way it is. So I'm gonna leave it for that. I might hit this up here a little bit more by the handle, just to try to get rid of that gray. We might have it up here coming creeping up a little bit more. And fading out towards this way just a little bit. And then same thing up here, probably gonna make a little bit higher than normal than what I thought I was gonna do. I'm going to try to get rid of some of this gray, just kind of mask it a little bit. That way everything is nice and pretty much covered. There we go. So everything's pretty much covered the way I want it. Again, I am not worried about covering these mountains up whatsoever. If you're really worried about the mountains, you could tape them off prior to doing all this. I'm going to fade this out over here a little bit. Just to give it more ground. I'm going to fade this side out a little bit more too. All right. And I'm gonna take this out a little bit more. There we go. I'm liking the way that looks. I'm gonna pull you guys back so you guys can get the full image here. It's a lot of yellow right now, but we're gonna start tying in all the grass down here. That is gonna be next. So we got the grass laid out, all the shadowing and highlights where we need them in the grass. We got the sky laid out as far as the background color goes, so where we can start adding other layers of color on top of it and start adding in clouds and things like that. And then once we get all that finished, we can start working on building these mountains up and getting them in color. And then at the very end of the entire image, before I start adding in the detailed stuff, because there's gonna be stuff that we're gonna plant in this photo in different spots. Like for one, there's gonna be 3 crosses, and we're gonna put those kind of back here, and there's gonna be 3 crosses back there to resemble the people that have passed away. So there's gonna be things like that where we're gonna place inside this photo to really tie it in. But before we do all that, we're gonna unmask it all once we get the background done, and then we're gonna start playing with the reflections of the sunset bouncing off of the road, bouncing off of the semi. And then at that point is the time where we're gonna start tightening everything up and really adding in the final details of everything. And then we can start adding in those little trinkets of messages here and there. And then that'll be the end of everything, is when we start getting all that little stuff in. So I'm gonna end this video right here. Thank you guys for watching. If you guys enjoy this, stay tuned. I'm gonna have another video up pretty quickly we're gonna start blocking in this field of grass here. We're gonna start blocking all that in with the greens and all the other different colors that are gonna be inside this. And don't forget the light. Like I said, the light source from the sunset is also going to be playing a part of the reflections of like the oranges and the reds and things like that, and the yellows coming through the sky and bouncing off the ground too. So we're going to do all that in the next video, and then after that, like I said, we'll move on to the mountains. So appreciate you guys watching. Make sure you subscribe. That's one thing I always stress, is subscribe and like the videos. That way other people can actually see the videos pop up, and they can also watch and learn and comment below on these videos. That way we can get them out and more people can actually start seeing them, because right now there's not very many people able to actually see on YouTube the videos popping up. So the more subscriptions, the more likes the videos get, the more awareness it brings to people, and they'll start to get out, and we'll have more people involved, and we start doing more cool stuff like this. But this thing is wrapping up to be awesome. It's a really, really special piece for the customers, so we're gonna make it really, really cool. And you just gotta stay tuned, because it's gonna come together pretty quick from here on out. So thanks for watching. I'll see you guys on the next one.